Sign this now, Amara. No more delays.
Auntie, please, I can't.
You will obey. Sign it.
Sign it. Obiageli slammed the marriage document on the table so hard the kerosene lamp flickered. Sign it tonight or I will make your life in this house so unbearable that you'll beg to marry a dead man, let alone a blind one. Amara looked at the paper, then at her stepmother, then at her father, who was sitting in the corner of the room with his hands folded in his lap like a man who had already surrendered a battle he hadn't yet admitted to losing. His eyes were locked on the floor. "Papa," Amara said in a soft voice. "Papa, please look at me." Her father, Clement, could not summon the courage to look up at her. And in that moment, something inside Amara broke so quietly that nobody in that room heard it. A soft interior collapse, the sound of a 19-year-old girl realizing that the last person she had trusted in the world had chosen peace over her. She had no choice but to pick up the pen and signed. Obiageli smiled the smile of a woman who had just won a war she had been planning for 2 years. "Good girl," she said, collecting the paper before the ink was even dry. "You'll thank me someday." Amara said nothing. Instead, she walked to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at her mother's photograph on the wall until the lamp outside burned out and darkness swallowed the room completely. But to understand what kind of evil could drive a woman to sell her stepdaughter into a marriage like a transaction, we must go back to where it all began.
Welcome to Storyline Haven, where we share heartwarming folktales that feed your mind and uplift your soul. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story and we can grow together as one family. Thank you so much for your support. God bless you.
Amara's mother Ngozi had been everything. Not just to Amara but to everyone who knew her. She was the woman neighbors came to for advice when marriages were breaking. She was the woman her husband Clement had built his entire sense of self around, which meant that when she died, Clement didn't just lose a wife, he lost something that seemed to be everything to him. Obiageli found him in that rubble, and rebuilt him in her own image through patient and absolute calculation. By the time she moved into that house with her 2 daughters Nneka and Santo, she had mapped every weakness Clement possessed, and knew exactly how to use each one. But Amara was the only problem. Not because Amara was troublesome or because she was loud or disrespectful or difficult to manage. Amara was the problem precisely because she was none of those things. She was bright, composed, and carried her mother's face so completely that looking at her was like looking at her mother. Every time Clement looked at Amara, he remembered Ngozi. And every time he remembered Ngozi, he became slightly less available to Obiageli. And that was unacceptable. "That girl will never let this man fully belong to me," Obiageli told her sister during a private visit, her voice stripped of all pretense. "As long as she's in this house, I'm competing with her mother Ngozi." "So what will you do?" her sister asked. Obiageli stirred her tea slowly. "I'll find her a husband quickly and quietly. And far enough away that she stops being a daily reminder of that thing she called a mother." The husband Obiageli found was Emeka Dike. Emeka had arrived in the village 3 months earlier with his elderly uncle, Matsi Dike, whose compound sat at the far edge of the community. The story that traveled through the village was simple and sad. Emeka had been a welder in Port Harcourt when a terrible accident sent sparks directly into both eyes. The damage was severe to the extent that he could not see anything with clarity. He spent most of his days sitting in Matsi Dike's compound listening to the radio. The village had already written him off. "What kind of life is that?" people said. "A young man finished before he even started. God forbid." Obiageli heard all of this and felt nothing but opportunity. She went to Clement on a quiet evening, armed with the specific combination of gentleness and logic that she knew dismantled him most effectively. "I've been praying about Amara," she began. Clement looked up from his newspaper. "What about her? She needs to be settled. She's almost 20, Clement. And we both know our finances cannot support university. But I've heard of a decent young man staying with Matsi Dike. He needs someone patient and caring. Amara is patient and caring. It could be a good match." "Obiageli, that man is blind," Clement said. "He's not completely blind. And since when does a man's eyes determine his character? Amara is not a beauty queen going to a pageant. She's a young woman who needs a home and a husband who will value her. This man will value her precisely because of his condition. She will never be abandoned or cheated on or be taken for granted. Clement stared at her for a long time. She held his gaze steadily, her expression perfectly calibrated between reason and compassion. He then looked away. "Let me think about it," he said, which with Clement always meant yes. Clement told his younger sister, Auntie Rucky, about it. She fought with everything she had when she found out. She came to that house like a thunderstorm, loud and righteous and completely ineffective against a woman like Obiageli who had already secured Clement's agreement before the opposition could mobilize. "You're making a mistake you cannot take back, Clement," Auntie Rucky shouted. "Ngozi is turning in her grave right now. You hear me? Turning." "Rucky, lower your voice," Clement was saying, but before he could complete his sentence, his younger sister cut him off. "I will not lower my voice. That is Ngozi's daughter we are talking about. Not a goat you're trading at the market." But the paper was already signed. The date has already been set. And Obiageli was already at Aguda Market, buying the cheapest wrapper she could find. What she was not doing, what it never occurred to her calculating mind to do, was ask why a man with Emeka's condition had the quietest confidence she had ever seen in anyone. The morning of the wedding was gray and humid. Amara dressed alone in her room, wrapping the cheap Ankara fabric around herself with hands that didn't tremble, which surprised her. She had expected to fall apart. Instead, she felt something strange and unfamiliar. Not peace exactly. More like the particular stillness that descends on a person when they have passed through the worst moment and realize they are still breathing. Her stepsister Neka appeared in the doorway, looked at her for a moment, and then said something that revealed more about their household than any long speech could. "The food for the ceremony. Mama says you should serve it yourself before you leave with your groom, so the guests don't think we're disorganized." Amara looked at her. "On my wedding morning." Neka shrugged and left. Without holding back, Amara served the food. The ceremony was small, functional, and stripped of every warmth that should accompany the joining of two lives. Obiageli had organized it the way she organized everything involving Amara. The minimum required to make it legitimate, nothing more. A few neighbors, some family members who came more out of curiosity than celebration, and Clement, who sat through the entire event looking at his own hands. Auntie Rucky did not come. She had sent a message the night before. "I cannot watch this. But Amara, hear me. Your mother's God is not sleeping. Remember that." When Amara was finally led to where Emeka sat waiting, she studied him carefully for the first time. He was tall even sitting down, with broad shoulders and the kind of stillness that didn't come from defeat but from something deeper. He was dressed simply but well, his agbada clean and carefully pressed. His eyes, when they turned in her direction, were slightly unfocused, moving a fraction past her face rather than directly onto it. But his expression was composed, almost gentle. He reached out his hand toward her, not quite accurate, stopping an inch short of where she stood. She stepped forward and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. "I'm told your name is Amara," he said quietly so only she could hear. "Yes," Amara replied. "Your name means grace," he said, nodding slowly. "That's a good name to bring into a home." Amara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But something shifted very slightly in the locked room of her chest. Obiageli watched the hand-holding from across the compound with satisfaction stitched into every line of her face. She leaned toward her sister and murmured, "By this time next week, nobody will be talking about that girl in connection with this family anymore. She's the blind man's problem now." Her sister giggled behind her hand. Amara moved into Matsi Dyke's compound that evening with one bag and her mother's photograph. Emeka's uncle received her with a warmth that startled her, holding both her hands and looking at her with kind eyes. "Welcome, my daughter," Matsi Dyke said. "This compound has been waiting for someone like you for a long time." She didn't know what he meant. She filed it away alongside the other things she didn't yet understand about this situation, and focused on surviving the next 24 hours. That night, Emeka sat across from her in the small parlor while his uncle left early, giving the two of them space to begin knowing each other. The silence between them was long but not uncomfortable. Emeka seemed to have no anxiety about silence, which Amara found immediately unusual. Every man she had ever known filled silence with noise. This one inhabited it like familiar territory. You've been too quiet, Emeka said. It appears you do not want this marriage. Amara looked at him carefully and then answered, saying, This is not the marriage I have prayed for. Well, let's see what you will say in the next few weeks, Emeka said and then paused for a minute. Though I couldn't see your face clearly during the ceremony, he said. But from the sound of your voice, I believe you will be a kind person. Amara was quiet for a moment. Did you specifically request to marry me? She asked. No. Your stepmother talked to me about you and I agreed to marry you, he said. But I also made a decision when I agreed that whatever this is, I would try to make it into something worth having, and I will try as much as possible to always make you happy and build a beautiful life with you. He paused. I'm asking you to make the same decision for me. You're very direct for someone who just met me, Amara said. I find that unclear communication wastes time that neither of us has. A very small smile crossed his face. Also, I can't see your expression well enough to know when I'm saying the wrong thing, so I've learned to just say the true thing and adjust from there. Despite everything she's been through, Amara almost smiled. In the few weeks that Amara had been spending with Emeka, she had noticed some inconsistencies. The phone calls Emeka took privately, speaking in the low measured tones of someone discussing serious business. The visitors who came occasionally, men in clean cars who greeted Emeka with respect that made no sense for a blind man living in a village compound. The way Matsi Dyke deflected whenever she asked innocent questions about Emeka's life before the accident. One evening she finally asked directly, Emeka, what did you do before the accident? Before you came here? He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, saying, Why do you ask? Because nothing here adds up, Amara said. Those men who visit you don't greet you like someone who needs help. They greet you like someone who is superior to them and has the ability to grant them help. Emeka turned his face toward her, and even with the unfocused gaze, she felt seen in a way that made her breath catch. You're very observant, he said quietly, and then there was a brief moment of silence. Then he said, Give me 2 more weeks, Amara, and then I'll answer every question you have. All of them. I promise. She studied him for a long moment and then told him she was going to give him the 2 weeks. She didn't know it yet, but those 2 weeks would end with an explosion that would reach all the way back to her father's house and reduce everything Obiageli had built to rubble. The 2 weeks ended on a Tuesday morning when a black SUV pulled into Matsi Dyke's compound, followed by a second vehicle carrying 2 men in medical scrubs. Amara was in the kitchen when she heard the cars and came out wiping her hands on a kitchen towel to find Emeka standing in the compound, already dressed in clean clothes, his uncle beside him wearing the expression of a man who had been waiting for this day for a very long time. What's happening? Amara asked. Matsi Dyke turned to her with soft eyes. My daughter, today your husband goes to collect what belongs to him. Amara had no understanding of what the man was saying. They waited for a few minutes for Amara to get dressed and got into the car. They drove 3 hours to a private hospital in Asaba that looked nothing like any medical facility Amara had ever seen. Marble floors, uniformed staff, an entrance that felt more like a hotel than a hospital. The doctor who received them was clearly expecting Emeka, greeting him by name with the ease of a long professional relationship. Mr. Dyke, we've been ready for 2 weeks. Are you ready? I'm ready, Emeka said. Then he turned his face toward Amara. Stay with my uncle, this is only going to take a moment. The procedure lasted 4 hours. Amara sat in a waiting room with Matsi Dyke, who finally, in the quiet of that waiting room with nowhere left to hide the truth, began to talk. Emeka Dyke was not a failed welder from Port Harcourt. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Dyke Engineering Solutions, one of the fastest-growing construction and infrastructure companies in the South-South region, with contracts spanning 3 states and a workforce of over 400 people. The accident had been real, the eye damage had been real, but the decision to retreat to the village during his recovery had been entirely deliberate. He wanted to know who he was without the money, Matsi Dyke said simply. He wanted to know if he could still be a man when he had nothing obvious to offer. He wanted to find a wife who would choose him in his low season, not his high one. Amara stared at him. He chose to live like that? He chose it. Yes, he chose it, Matsi Dyke replied. And when your family approached us about the marriage, I won't lie to you, I was against it at first. I didn't want my nephew married to someone who was being forced. But Emeka said, Uncle, let me meet her first. And after he met you, after just 3 weeks of living beside you, he told me something. Matsidike paused. He said, she's not bitter. After everything they did to her, she's not bitter. That's the woman I want beside me when my eyes open. Amara's throat tightened so completely she couldn't speak. He also said you were the most observant person he had ever met. The old man smiled. He meant that as the highest compliment. When Emeka walked out of that theater 4 hours later, his eyes were bandaged. The doctor explained that the bandages would come off in 48 hours, that the surgery had been successful beyond expectation, that full vision should be restored within weeks. On the drive home, Emeka held Amara's hand the entire way and said almost nothing. But his grip said everything. 48 hours later, in the quiet of the compound, the doctor who had driven down from Asaba carefully removed the bandages. Amara stood a few feet away, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Emeka blinked for about 2 times. Then his eyes moved slowly around the compound, adjusting, recalibrating, drinking in light and color and shape after 2 years of blurred darkness. They moved across his uncle's face, across the mango tree, across the red dust of the compound floor. And then finally they found Amara. He looked at her for a very long time without speaking. She stood still under that gaze, suddenly conscious of the cheap wrapper she was still wearing, her unadorned face, her simple braided hair. Then Emeka said, "So this is what grace looks like." Amara put her face in her hands and wept. 2 weeks after that, the calls started. Business associates who had given Emeka space during his recovery began reappearing. Meetings were scheduled. Site visits were arranged. The compound that had been quiet and simple began receiving a different caliber of visitor entirely, men and women in pressed suits arriving in clean cars, addressing Emeka as sir and boss, with the sincerity of people who meant it. Amara watched all of it with wide eyes, still adjusting to the architecture of the life she had accidentally walked into. "Are you overwhelmed?" Emeka asked her one evening. "Completely," she said honestly. He laughed, a full, unguarded laugh she hadn't heard from him before. "Good. Overwhelmed means it's real." He looked at her seriously. "Are you ready to build a life with me?" "I am ready," she said, without hesitation, smiling softly. "Then we'll build it together." The news reached Obiageli on a Friday afternoon through the most effective delivery system in any Nigerian community. Gossip. Specifically, the kind that travels faster than any vehicle, because it carries the irresistible energy of a story that has turned completely upside down. Her neighbor came first. "Obiageli, have you heard about Matsidike's nephew? The blind one you married your stepdaughter to." Obiageli looked up from her cooking. "What about him?" "He's not blind anymore. He had surgery. And they're saying he's not poor either. They're saying he owns a big construction company. That those men that used to visit him in that compound were his workers and business partners." The spoon in Obiageli's hand stopped moving. "They're saying your stepdaughter is living in a fully furnished house in Asaba now. That her husband bought her a car. That she has staff." The neighbor paused, savoring every syllable. "They're saying the wedding you arranged to punish her was actually the greatest blessing of her life." The spoon clattered to the floor. Obiageli's legs carried her to her bedroom where she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the full catastrophic irony of what she had done. She had hand-delivered Amara to a wealthy, decent, extraordinary man. She had packaged her stepdaughter in a cheap wrapper and placed her like a gift at the feet of exactly the kind of future she had been trying to deny her. The cruelty she had engineered with such precision had become the very instrument of Amara's elevation. She went to Clement that evening, her voice stripped of all its usual confidence. "Did you hear about Emeka Dike?" Clement looked up from his chair. He had heard. Of course he had heard. The whole community had heard. He looked at his wife for a long moment, and in his eyes Obiageli saw something she had never seen there before. Not anger or shock, but a slow, dawning clarity, the look of a man who had finally woken up and was taking full inventory of the damage done while he slept. "You told me you were thinking of her future," he said quietly. "Clement." Obiageli was trying to say, but Clement cut her off. You told me you were doing it for her good. Despite the fact that Amara was having a good life, Clement could not help but admit that he had not failed Ngozi. He had failed Amara. And he would have to live with that. Without hesitation, he called Amara that night for the first time in months. She answered after 3 rings. Amara, he said, his voice cracking on the single syllable of her name. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew Obiageli never had good plans for you and I sided with her anyway. But now I'm sorry. The silence on the line lasted a long time. Then Amara said, I know, Papa. At the end of the phone conversation, Clement asked if she could forgive him. Amara, sitting in her new living room in Asaba, Emeka's hand resting on hers, her mother's photograph finally hanging on a wall in a home that was fully and completely hers, said, Yes, Papa. I have forgiven you, and I am truly happy to do it. Obiageli did not call. She had nothing left to say that any amount of words could repair. Her daughters, watching their mother's careful architecture of cruelty collapse into irony, grew quieter and more subdued in the weeks that followed. The social confidence Obiageli had always worn like armor developed visible cracks. The community that had once respected her sharp intelligence now looked at her with the particular expression reserved for people who have outsmarted themselves. She had wanted disgrace for Amara, but instead she had crowned the very girl she tried to destroy. Amara never went back to that house to gloat. She had no interest in gloating. She sent her father money quietly, without announcement, because he was her father and that would never change no matter what he had allowed. She invited Auntie Rucky to Asaba and wept with her over a proper meal, and the kind of laughter that only comes after surviving something that almost broke you. And sometimes in the evenings, when the Asaba sun was going down and the light came through the windows in long gold strips, Amara would look at the life surrounding her and think of her mother's words. When life puts you in darkness, don't curse the dark. Wait. Your eyes will adjust. And then you'll see what God hid there for you. She had waited and her eyes had adjusted. And what God had hidden in the darkness had turned out to be more than she had ever known to ask for. If this story moves something in you, if it reminded you that what looks like a curse is sometimes a blessing in disguise, please like this video right now and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us, did Amara's father deserve her forgiveness? We want to know what you think. Share this video with someone who is going through a dark season and needs to be reminded that God is not finished with their story. We'll see.